What if I told you that most football cards will never be investments? Not bad investments, not disappointing investments. They were never really investments in the first place. And that is one of the hardest truths in this hobby. Because football cards are fun. They're nostalgic, they connect us with players, memories, seasons, and moments. But just because something is exciting to own, does that mean that it's a sound place to store capital? And in football cards, that distinction matters a lot. Over the years, people in this hobby have confused collecting with investing, speculation with conviction, hype with significance, and short-term demand with long-term value. And when that happens, reality usually wins. So in this video, I want to make a simple argument. Most football cards will never be investments. Not because football cards are worthless, not because nobody should buy them, and not because there are no great cards, but because true long-term value in football cards is much rarer than most people think. And if you do not understand that, you are probably not investing. You are hoping. One of the biggest problems in the hobby is that people use the word investment for almost everything. Buying a box and hoping to hit a quarterback, buying a rookie after one big game, buying a parallel because it's numbered to 25, buying a card because the market moved last month. That is not necessarily investing. A lot of time it's just speculation. And speculation is not automatically bad. Every market has speculation. But the problem comes when people dress speculation up as something more durable than it really is. Because real investing usually depends on a few things: durability, long-term demand, real scarcity, cultural significance, and enough liquidity for the asset to still matter when attention moves on. Most football cards do not have that. Most football cards live in a market that is crowded, fast-moving, and heavily driven by attention. And attention is not the same thing as value. That is the first thing people need to understand. This is where the hobby gets brutally selective. Every year, new rookies come in with hype. Every year, people chase quarterbacks. Every year, collectors convince themselves that this class is loaded. This player is different. This card is the one. And every year, most of those outcomes fade. Because the truth is simple. Most players do not become all-time greats. Most players do not become hobby immortals. Most players do not build the kind of career that creates lasting card demand 10 or 20 years later. That is not negativity. That is math. If you look back across football history, the number of players whose cards truly hold long-term significance is tiny compared to the number of players whose cards were once chased. That gap is massive. At one point, collectors were excited about all kinds of names that barely matter now in the market. Good players, Pro Bowlers, stars for a moment, guys with real fans and real production. But the card market does not reward pretty good forever. Honestly, it barely rewards great forever. Usually, the market only gives durable long-term demand to a very small number of players. All-time quarterbacks, transformational legends, iconic names, historical outliers. And that means most football cards fail the investment test before we even get to brands, print runs, grading, or condition, because the player himself often never becomes important enough. Football has some of the greatest athletes in American sports history, but the card market does not reward all positions equally. A Hall of Fame wide receiver, a legendary running back, an all-time defensive player, those careers may matter enormously in football history, but that does not always translate into the same kind of durable card demand that top quarterbacks get. So now you have two filters working against most cards. First, most cards never become historically important enough. Second, even many great football players do not become elite hobby assets. That is a brutal combination, and it means football cards are more selective than most people realize from the start. This might be the most misunderstood idea in the modern hobby. People see a serial number and assume it means importance. Numbered to 99, numbered to 25, numbered to 10, one of one. And yes, scarcity matters, but scarcity only matters when it meets demand that lasts. A rare card of an unimportant player is still just a rare card of an unimportant player. Scarcity is not magic. It does not create significance out of thin air. If the player is not historically important, if the card is not culturally meaningful, if the brand does not matter, and if collectors do not care 5 or 10 years later, the print run alone does not save it. This is another truth people do not say often enough. Football is one of the hardest sports to invest in through cards. Why? Because careers are shorter, injuries matter more, performance can swing quickly, and the market is heavily concentrated around quarterbacks. That last point matters more than people realize. Even truly great non-quarterbacks often have weaker long-term card markets than their greatness would suggest. Think about that. This is where modern cards often trick people. They see color, they see low numbering, they see a clean grade, they see a recent comp, and they assume the market is proving something permanent. But often, it's only proving something temporary, a moment of attention, a season of excitement, a wave of demand. And those things fade faster than people think. The market has a way of exposing which cards were truly important and which cards were simply active for a while. Here's another uncomfortable truth. A lot of hobby buying is not based on deep long-term conviction. It's based on the belief that someone else will buy later at a higher price. That works for a while until it does not. Because once the attention cools, the buyer pool gets smaller. Once the player stops trending, urgency disappears. Once the season ends, the emotional bid softens. Once the next rookie class arrives, the hobby moves on. And when that happens, people find out very quickly whether they own something truly important or just temporarily liquid. That is why liquidity matters so much. It's not enough for a card to sell during peak excitement. The real question is this: does it still command serious interest when the hype is gone? Can it survive the off-season? Can it survive a bad season? Can it survive a new draft class? Can it survive time? Most football cards cannot, and that is why they fail as investments, because the market for them is thinner and more fragile than it looked when everything felt hot. And I want to be really clear here. Saying most football cards will never be investments is not an attack on collecting. Collecting is the heart of this hobby. You should buy cards you love. You should build player collections. You should chase nostalgia. You should care about design, history, rarity, and personal meaning. That is all real. That all matters. But when people confuse those things with investing, they often set themselves up for disappointment, because the standard for a great collectible and the standard for a great investment are not the same. A card can be beautiful and still not be a strong long-term asset. A card can mean something to you and still not have a broad market demand. A card can be your favorite card and still not be investable, and that is okay. In fact, that honestly makes collecting healthier, because once you stop demanding that every purchase justify itself as an investment, you start seeing the hobby more clearly. You start appreciating cards for what they are, and you become more selective about the ones that may actually matter financially. That is a better way to operate. So maybe the question is not, are football cards investments? Maybe the better question is, which football cards have actually earned the right to be treated like serious long-term assets? That is a much better question, because it's narrower, harder, more honest, and more useful. It forces you to care about history. It forces you to care about brand. It forces you to care about player legacy. It forces you to care about scarcity that matters, not just scarcity that exists. And above all, it forces you to care about whether demand can survive time. That is the game. Not chasing every hot card, not pretending every numbered parallel is a future grail, not calling every purchase an investment, but learning to identify the rare cards that truly rise above the noise. That is where this gets interesting. Most football cards will never be investments. That is not cynical. That is not anti-hobby. That is just a reality. And the sooner collectors accept that, the sooner they can become more disciplined, more thoughtful, and honestly more fulfilled in the hobby. Because when everything is treated like an investment, nothing is seen clearly. But when you become more selective, you start to understand what actually matters. The players that matter, the brands that matter, the cards that matter. And that is what Pigskin Portfolio is about. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel. because this is exactly what we're going to be doing here. Not chasing noise, not repeating hype, but studying the football cards that actually matter and the market truths that most people would rather ignore. Thank you for watching.